Welcome on in. WIP Daily, Joe Giglio with you. Appreciate everyone listening, subscribing, following the podcast. Of course, however you listen, whether it be YouTube or our podcast feed. Appreciate that. Tucker will join me in a few minutes here on a video feed, 94 WIP. Check it out on YouTube. Reaction to what we've seen Wild Card Weekend. Of course, final thoughts on tonight with the Eagles and Buccaneers. It is a game day. The playoffs have arrived, and kind of a crazy first weekend of the playoffs. Let's just start with the biggest one as it pertains to the Eagles, and that's what happened yesterday down in Dallas. Jordan Love and the Packers went there and just destroyed the Dallas Cowboys. That game, they won by double digits. It wasn't even that close. They owned that game from the opening snap. Some thoughts on the Cowboys-Packers thing. Number one, obviously changes are coming to Dallas. I think McCarthy might be done by the time you watch this or listen to this. That's a major thing. Dallas also, they're in a weird spot with their franchise. A lot of free agents. Dak has to be paid. Are they in a spot where they're going to have to try to turn this thing over, go all in for 1 year if they do bring Belichick? I don't know. But the Dallas Cowboys' future certainly up in the air now. They just were terrible yesterday. I thought they played tight. I thought they played scared. They were a little bit almost – I felt like the ghosts of all their playoff losses are starting to just get them now, where they assume this is going to happen. They're starting to remind me a little bit of those Phillip Rivers Chargers. Like, we can look at all the Cowboys failures over the years. You go back to Romo, everything post-90s. But this iteration, the Dak iteration, reminds me a lot of those Phillip Rivers Chargers, where it's like they're really good. This is the first time in NFL history a team has won 12 games, 3 straight years, and not made at least one conference title game. It's unbelievable. The Chargers had similar runs to this with Marty Schottenheimer and Norv Turner, where they had Rivers and they had Tomlinson. They had great players, Antonio Gates. They couldn't get over the hump, though, and that's what this Cowboys thing reminds me of. Big changes coming there. As far as the Packers go, wow. It's the youngest offense to ever make the playoffs, and they're just starting their run now. Now, we'll see if they could actually upend San Francisco, but I mean in terms of their contention window, Jordan Love is a wow quarterback. His change and his transformation within this season is as good as a transformation I've seen a young quarterback make within a year I don't know. I mean, I don't know the last time I saw anything like this. Like, it's one thing a guy takes a leap. Maybe Burrow, when he really started to ascend and they made the Super Bowl a couple years ago. Remarkable that the Packers have found themselves another star quarterback. And the last thing on the Cowboys thing is the similarities between Dak Prescott and Joel Embiid are uncomfortably spot on. They're both really tremendous regular season players. This year, Dak got to the MVP level that Joel has been at the last year and a half, but they just are not good enough in the big moment. They constantly fail when everything's on the line. So Dallas gone, which means, of course, the Eagles will now go face the Lions, who upend the Rams last night. That was a great game. We needed one because we'll get to the AFC games in a second and the fallout there. But the NFC game, all three games really, but until yesterday, last evening, stunk. They were blowouts. They just really weren't that entertaining. And then yet last night, I mean, that game couldn't have been any more living up to the billing. I mean, Goff was incredible. Stafford, incredible. The atmosphere in Detroit was so much fun to watch. I just felt so happy for those people. A couple of things stood out to me in that game. One, I don't usually feel the emotions of the players. I'm just kind of numb to it, whatever. I mean, a local athlete here, have a big moment I'll feel the emotion of them. But outside of Philadelphia, they're great athletes and great players and highly paid, and there's a million of them, and then there'll be new ones. I don't get caught up in most of the emotion of the players. But I felt really happy for Jared Goff last night. His story is fascinating to me. A number one pick who stunk, then was revived, but maybe wasn't quite great, was good, and then dumped by his team because they were trying to win a championship, and they win without him. And they didn't just send him away. They sent him to maybe the worst place you could go, a terrible franchise that, almost no one thought he could revive his career like this again and lead Detroit back to, glory. We're close to, this is glory for Detroit. They haven't won a playoff game in years, a home playoff, and had a home playoff game in 30 years. So for him to do what he did last night, to beat Sean McVay and the Rams, I just thought that was awesome. And I thought, on this, I think one of the first podcasts we did here, right around the draft time, I said, this Lions team's going to be really good and dangerous, and they are. They're in the final 8 now, and they're the Eagles' next opponent if we get a win tonight for the Philadelphia Eagles. Really happy for Goff. And I thought some of the storylines heading into the game were really just off. The idea that Sean McVay is so much better of a coach than Dan Campbell, I don't believe he is. He's a gifted offensive mind, and he is an accomplished coach. But in game, McVay leaves a lot to be desired sometimes. He's too conservative, and he can make some things. He could do some things that cost his team. They were 0-for-3 in the red zone, maybe not aggressive enough to go for some fourth downs. The punt late in the game just can't happen. Meanwhile, I thought the aggressiveness of Dan Campbell going for it on a fourth down in the red zone early, that was a deciding play in the game. And then, of course, on the 2nd and 9 late, throwing the ball with Jared Goff, not waiting for third down. I thought Campbell pushed the envelope last night, which he has every minute of his tenure. I thought McVay cowered a little bit. But the game itself lived up to the billing. I mean, just both quarterbacks were incredible. We thought maybe Wentz was going to come in at one point because Stafford was getting beat up. And, of course, Puka Nacua, the young player for the Rams, he's an incredible player. My rookie record for receiving yards. Really fun game last night. And happy for the Lions. They win. They get another home game next week. It'll be the Eagles if they win. AFC quickly, and then we'll get to some final thoughts on the Eagles as we get ready for the game tonight. So the Browns, I know they disappointed Tucker and myself. I thought they could make a run here in the playoffs. One thing I didn't consider enough. I did it during the regular season making picks. I kind of moved off it as we got to the playoffs. I shouldn't have. I've never seen anything like this in the NFL. The Browns defense at home versus the road, night and day. We had a little bit of it here with Jim Schwartz, which is ironic when he was here, like 17 and 18. But it was egregious. The Browns were the number one defense points per game allowed in the NFL at home in Cleveland this year. I believe they were dead last on the road or close to it. And you saw it again. I know Flacco and the midnight struck on Cinderella, and Flacco had 2 bad picks there. But their defense really gave him no chance. I mean, that game had to be the Browns' defense being the best unit on the field. It wasn't. They got torched. So the Browns, after some nice vibes here, go back to reality, which is playoffs. Still don't know what they have in Deshaun Watson. Stuck with that. And Cinderella, the midnight thing happened. So it's over for them. As far as the Texans go, kind of the Packers of the AFC, this young quarterback that has emerged very fast and has changed their now, their present, and the future. I do think the Packers are really obviously live right now, but are going to be a team that you think about in the Super Bowl a year from now, if not this year. The Texans are building that same thing. C.J. Stroud is for real. And I mean, when you have that kind of young quarterback, it changes your franchise. DeMeco Ryans a good coach. They've got good players, too. I mean, Nico Collins is a star receiver. They've got pass rushers, Will Anderson. They are Stingley, a high draft pick a couple of years ago. They're on their way to being a really, really good football team for years to come. And then the other thing about that game Saturday, did you notice who was getting quarterback hits? Did you notice who hit Flacco on the one interception that was returned back that I think he was trying to throw it out of bounds and he just got hit and he couldn't get enough on it? That was Derek Barnett, who's been one of the better pass rushers in the league since he left here, which really shines poorly on the Eagles coaches. Really does. They missed him as another body in the rotation. I know he didn't want to be here anymore because he wasn't getting enough snaps, but what a ridiculous. It reminds me a little bit of Rasul Douglas, where almost instantly they leave. It's like, oh, they could play a little bit. It wasn't as bad as we felt the player was. And Barnett, kind of a weird career we'll remember here because he made plays early, started a lot early, and then it just got worse and worse, and an injury last year. But how about that? Derek Barnett making plays help a team win a playoff game, something he hasn't done for the Eagles in quite some time. And as far as the Saturday night game goes, I just totally misread that thing. I thought that the Dolphins would show up more than they did. Too many penalties. I thought Miami's defense actually held their own with 6 starters out. They fought, but Miami's offense was awful. I mean, just awful. And they have a major decision to make on Tua because he didn't look like a $50 million a year quarterback on that field, and their offense really fell apart again in December. Miami's got the bones of some good things if they get those defensive players right and healthy next year. But, that line of where is Tua? He has good numbers, obviously good weapons, and when given time or when he's on time, he could be accurate, but he didn't match up. And meanwhile, Patrick Mahomes, it's playoff time. This is what he does. Patrick Mahomes' ability to turn it on in the postseason even more than his regular season, and he's, an unbelievable regular season quarterback, is why we're watching a guy that already is a top 4 or 5 quarterback in history of pro football. All right, let's go to tonight. 2 games. I mean, I'm not going to give more thoughts on the Bills and and the Steelers. I'll watch that as we lead into pregame tonight at 6 on WIP, but the Eagles game. So here's what I did this morning, just because I want to kind of recalibrate in my mind what I think about this game. And I'm of almost two minds. Like, the Eagles have given me no reason in one part of my brain to believe in them. The other part of my brain says they're probably going to go win this game, because I don't think much of the Bucs. I don't think much of Todd Bowles. Tampa Bay last week had a chance to go and win the division, and they won 9-0 in Carolina. So I late last week, I kind of convinced myself the Eagles were going to win. But I was thinking about the game this morning. Obviously, no A.J. Brown. That news came out over the weekend. And there's this stuff hovering over the Eagles about their future. And just the vibes have not been good with this football team in a long time. But what struck me this morning as I really thought about this game without A.J. Brown is I did the thing that we did back, I think it was before the Niners game on the podcast, which was, who are the top 10 players in this game? So I'm just going to reel off what I wrote down, and then we'll bring Tucker on to give his final thought on the game. But what struck me is, because the line all week has been weird, like Eagles favored, but we know there's issues there. I think they're about a 2.5-point favorite right now. In my mind, last week heading into the weekend, I thought the Eagles have struggled, but they're way more talented than the Buccaneers. And then I think this exercise always gives a good glimpse of it. I wrote the list down, and I came up with 5 Eagles and 5 Buccaneers, and that's obviously without A.J. Brown. It probably would have been 6-4 Eagles. But right now, tonight, the 10 best players I think will be on the field tonight based on who they are, how they've played this year. Obviously, some injuries are factored in, guys come back from injury. But here's what I wrote down, and it paints the picture of this game probably being even, because the 10 best players, 5 on one side, 5 on the other. So I had Kelsey 1, J.C. Kelsey, Mike Evans 2, Antoine Winfield is an all-pro 3, Lane Johnson 4, Vita Vea 5, Hassan Reddick 6. I put Hurts at 7, hasn't played well lately, and he's hurt. Baker Mayfield at 8, has had a nice year, but he's obviously hurt right now. Devontae Smith, and then Chris Godwin. So I had Kelsey, Evans, Winfield, Lane, Vita Vea, Hassan Reddick, Jalen Hurts, Baker Mayfield, Devontae Smith, Chris Godwin. Tucker, final thoughts as we get ready for tonight. I was surprised when I did that. That feels like it's actually kind of even with this game tonight.
Yeah, and I think the Buccaneers, based on what happened this season, basically Tom Brady left and everyone sort of wrote them off. And Baker Mayfield had a decent year, but this is still the team that kind of has the bones of the team that won the Super Bowl just a couple years ago, right? You listed off all those all those people, they were there. That was weird, wasn't it? I don't know what necessarily happened, but here we are. But I look at this Buccaneers team, and the big thing for me is the loss of A.J. Brown. And A.J. Brown hasn't done a whole lot, but he had 9 catches for 131 yards, and these two teams played back in week 3. And you look at the Eagles' receiving depth, they don't have anybody else who plays outside, right? Like, just look at the number of routes run from, out wide. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith have over 400. Next on the list is Olamide Zaccheaus at 100 and Julio Jones at 75, which those probably came in the last couple of weeks with Brown and Smith banged up. I mean, they don't have anybody with experience lining up on the outside because of those top 2 wide receivers on the depth chart pretty much taking every snap this season. So that's a concern for me, because this is a team that desperately needs to figure out how to get their passing game going. And without their top weapon on the outside, I just don't know what else they have. And, Quez Watkins had a great quote earlier in the week, and maybe this is the Quez Watkins game, and maybe that's what we deserve after writing him off like 6 times. But I don't know. If we're going into a playoff game and things are hinging on what Quez Watkins is doing, I don't feel great about the chances of that team.
Yeah, I hear you, and you're right about that. The Eagles don't have great receiver depth. They brought Julio Jones in. He did have a 2-touchdown game a couple weeks ago, but he can't run like he used to, even close to Quez. No one trusts here. This is a game they're going to have to run the football. I mean, this is like the old school Philadelphia run the ball kind of game to get through this thing. We'll see how much Jalen Hurts can give them in the run game tonight, because honestly, not just who he's throwing to, we don't know how he's going to throw the football with that finger. And if it gets hit again this season, the ups and downs, the losing the coordinator, the quarterback going backwards a little bit, it reminds me a lot of 2018. And for some reason, that last win in that season, wild card weekend, they won in Chicago, the double doink. I get a weird feeling tonight that we're getting that kind of ugly Eagles playoff win. Who knows? It was Golden Tate that year with the game-winning touchdown, the midseason acquisition that wasn't really that good. Maybe it's Kevin Byard tonight with a late interception to seal the deal or win the game for the Eagles. I do think they're going to win. I don't feel terribly confident about it, and it's going to be a wild week in Philadelphia, either getting ready for a trip to Detroit or perhaps I got a coaching list for you tomorrow morning. We'll talk about it all. Appreciate everyone listening, subscribing, following, of course, watching WIP Daily. Enjoy the playoff game. We'll talk tomorrow.